Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. The return of porpoising to the sport may not be that far away. It was a major talking point in 2022 at the start of these cycle regulations, and according to some of the engineers that are not very happy with the revised TD18, which is going to come into effect maybe from the Spanish Grand Prix, basically getting rid of flexi wings from the sport as we currently know it. The teams are concerned doing that manoeuvre may well bring porpoising back into play in what would be a pretty embarrassing scenario in the final year of the sport. Which teams could be caught out by this based on what we have seen over the last couple of seasons? Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We're going to start right about here. This is Franco Colapinto on the left-hand side, and with a load of other Alpine guys. And this, of course, is Pierre Gasly. Now, they're playing padel, I don't even know how you're going to pronounce it. But he put this on his Instagram story, or on his Instagram feed today. And, I mean, like, I don't know if Jack Doohan was invited to this, but let's just take a second to analyse what may or may not be going on here, right? Because we know that Flavio Briatore has signed up Colapinto for a long-term deal with the team. Pierre Gasly seems to be having a good time with his new teammate. Oh, well, hang on a second. Jack Doohan is meant to be driving the car. So what's going on there? Colapinto is the reserve driver, but probably not for very long. There's a rumour that maybe Doohan gets 6 races to prove himself, and if he does prove himself, he'll stay. To be honest, I think Doohan has to beat Gasly. Like, I genuinely think that's how it is. If Doohan doesn't literally outscore Gasly and beat him over the first 6 rounds, which the chances of that happening are very, very slim given Gasly's quality and experience at this point, I think Colapinto's getting the drive. I mean, it may happen as soon as Saudi Arabia or something, who knows? We don't really know what the contracts look like. It's just, you know, can we make it any more obvious? Do you know what I mean? That this is maybe going to be happening here, and obviously we've got Colapinto and Gasly standing next to each other, and, you know, maybe Jack Doohan was taking the photo or something. I'm not really sure. So, yeah, that's kind of maybe a rough start for him, but we'll see how things go. Of course, nothing is guaranteed in this sport. We also have confirmations on the start times for the Grand Prix. I think this maybe is more interesting just to look at what the Grand Prix are, because, you know, just a quick recap here that we have 24 this season, which is quite a lot. These are local times to where the circuit is, so you can try and work it out from there. Couple of notable adjustments, really, especially when it comes down to the situation in Las Vegas for the end of the season. Of course, these are the rounds that have sprints, so in China and in Miami. And then, just as a calendar, it's interesting, right? China being the second round of the season feels very strange. Japan being the third rounds feels, I mean, I don't know, so weird to me, to be honest, after what's happened with Japan in the last few years. But no, that is going to be early season, very early season, even before Bahrain and before Saudi Arabia because of the situation with Ramadan. I believe they've worked a couple of things out this year. 2 Italian Grand Prix still, one at Imola, Emilia-Romagna, and then, of course, Monza later in the year. These are the timelines for that, and they are, again, back-ending the sprints. I guess this is, I've not really thought much about it before, but I think it's quite obvious now that they are putting the sprints towards the end of the season because there are more points on the line and therefore potentially more championship-changing results that are possible given the scenario. So I think it's pretty evident what Formula 1 are doing with these decisions, but it's going to be Austin, Brazil, and then Qatar, another sprint race. These are the times. The most notable change really is Las Vegas. So I think last year it started at 10 p.m. local time, which is Vegas, Nevada time, which is West Coast time. So they're starting, to be fair, for European audiences, it could be worse because that's a 6 a.m. start in the UK, which is similar to what Australia turns out to be, right? So it's not maybe the end of the world. What it was the end of the world for, though, was audiences on the East Coast. If you were anywhere else in the States, and of course, it's a US-based Grand Prix, like how many people are staying up to 1 a.m. on the East Coast to watch the US Grand Prix at Las Vegas? Okay, not the US Grand Prix, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, watch the Vegas Grand Prix until like 3 in the morning and then going to bed. Probably not going to happen. So this year they're bringing it back by 2 hours. It's an 8 p.m. local start time. So it's an 11 p.m. start time on the East Coast, which is, you know, acceptable enough, I guess, right? If you're on the East Coast, you're going to start watching at 11, you're going to finish just before 1 in the morning. You know, it's not the end of the world if you're trying to watch a Grand Prix. In Europe, it makes it kind of tough. I mean, it would be, 4 a.m. in the UK, 5 a.m. in most of Europe. So I think this is probably a good move. I mean, it's not good for me. Like, I'd be happy with it where it was. But I think in general, it's probably the right decision for the, decision makers involved. Maybe they decided to do it last year at the time they did. And it's, look, it's late night in Vegas pretty much regardless of the circumstances. We're not that far away from the season. Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen are going to be teammates at Red Bull. We're not seeing them play any padel yet. Maybe that's going to be coming soon, I don't know. And realistically, there's not anyone else too much in the conversation for the drive. Yuki Tsunoda may be, in with a chance, but I think if Red Bull were going to give him a chance, that would have really happened by now. Red Bull were also kind of getting roasted for their new team kit. I know that I saw, some replies such as this one here from Mark Webber with, some of the better team kits the Red Bull have had in their history. This is what they've gone for this year. And, I don't know. What I don't understand is how Castor have all of these branding deals with all of these teams. Because I swear they're not cooking up anything special as far as I'm concerned. So, anyway, this is the Red Bull gear. Maybe you guys like it, and fair enough. You like it, you like it. But, I'm not a massive fan, I'll be honest. But look, who cares at the end of the day? If the car's fast, then the car's fast. And Mercedes will certainly be hoping that's the case. George Russell's talking about it and saying that, of course, having had Hamilton as his teammate for many years, he's now going to enter a new chapter, as he describes it, in the next stage of his career, kind of as, team leader, I suppose, as it were. There's also a piece of news, really, on the situation at Aston Martin, and I think it's definitely relevant to this discussion we're going to have in a second in terms of, is 2025 the year that many of these drivers need to secure their title? Because in 2025, as in a few weeks when the season gets underway again, we pretty clearly know, at least we should know, what the rough pecking order should be. We know what the engines are like in this set of regulations. We know that the engines, at least at the top of the grid, are pretty competitive. We know which drivers like these ground effect cars and which drivers generally do not. But we also know that it's going to be Ferrari, McLaren, probably Red Bull, at least in the mix with Verstappen, and then maybe Mercedes in the mix for next year's championships. Aston Martin are not going to make that kind of stride to be competitive enough in 2025. So that's why there's lots of theories that, okay, if you are going to win the championship in one of those teams, maybe this is the year to do it, because who knows what happens in 2026, especially when, if Max isn't like in the situation of Red Bull, he could go to Aston Martin. Even Gunther Steiner was asked his opinion on the Max to Aston Martin rumours, of course, for the £1 billion number, and said the following. Now, of course, look, it is an interesting debate, really, between someone's opinion and maybe a driver's perspective, because if I'm Max, do I really, maybe the $1 billion is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money, right? But would I take $1 billion over a few years or 100 million a year to drive a tractor or the best car? I'm taking less money to drive the best car. So, as far as Steiner's concerned, if Max finishes last, he should go for $1 billion. And maybe fair enough, but not in my opinion, and I don't imagine in Max's opinion either. At some point, money is obviously important, but it maybe doesn't make as much difference. The reality is, if Aston Martin are going to be good, then that's the talking point, right? I don't think the money, it is a motivating factor, but it's not necessarily about the money, right? The money is better spent from Aston Martin's side on improving the team. Then you're going to attract Max. That's the way to do it. You're not going to Haas can pay, or, AlphaTauri, not like that works. But Williams, okay, I don't know. There's not many teams that are even bad nowadays. Sauber, there we go. That's a good one. If they pay Max $1 billion, is he leaving to go and join them? There's no way. So this is kind of where the discussion leads into, what about, let's say, Hamilton going into that 2026 season? We just don't really know. Mercedes might have a rocket ship engine. McLaren, of course, are still using Mercedes engines in that year, so that's going to be an interesting transition. Aston Martin, therefore, have Newey on board, and they have Honda, and they might have Max. Who knows? They pay him enough money. So this is why there's been a feeling, and David Croft talked about this as well, Crofty, of course, from Sky Sports F1, that maybe this is the year for Hamilton to win. And it's not ideal, because he's obviously not up to speed yet, but, maybe, and it's not like he won't have opportunities maybe in 26, 27, but who knows? This year, there is an opportunity. The Ferrari is likely to be close to, if not a potential championship-winning car. So I think that's why there's just, again, more excitement for this season than there has been in a very long time. Even Peter Windsor was given his thoughts on Hamilton's crash at Ferrari at Barcelona. And look, the reality is, without having seen the crash, it's difficult to say whether this is a positive or a negative. You can spin it either way. Of course, crashing is never a good thing, but there is the argument that if Hamilton was pushing to the limits, especially with a car that can be quite tricky in the SF23, at the final corner of Barcelona, it's likely that he was feeling particularly comfortable in the car and was happy to push it absolutely to the edge. So, it's interesting, right? So maybe he hit a bump around that corner, maybe the car porpoised a little bit. We'll discuss that here in a second. Whether Hamilton Hamilton fans can be delighted about it, I think that's probably another question. But what we will be discussing here is the news around Ferrari and maybe the return of porpoising to not necessarily just their car, but other cars up and down the grid. So in a couple of days, Hamilton will be in the car for tyre testing, and this is going to be in the SF24. So in this year's machinery, last year's machinery. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same car. It's going to be a mule car, which means they're not going to take Charles Leclerc's SF24, Carlos Sainz's SF24, and give it to Hamilton. They're going to take a car which is very similar to that car, but not identical, probably with some elements of previous generation cars on it as well. So it's going to be a bit of a test car. They call it a mule car sometimes. It's not an identical piece of machinery to what the other guys I just mentioned use, but it will be relatively close. And of course, not on tyres that Hamilton will be familiar with, because these are 2026 tyres that he will be testing out. So there's that whole thing going on. But the other big story over the last couple of days has been the TD80. Now, TD80's been around a while, but they are making some adjustments to the technical directive number 18 around the flexibility of the front and the rear wing. So we talked about this over the last couple of days, that we believe from the Spanish Grand Prix, they will be shutting down the flexibility to a great extent, and aero elasticity will be out of the picture in Formula 1 again to some degree. It'll always be possible, there might always be loopholes, but within reason, they're saying, all right, guys, you know, you were pushing the limits too far against the spirit of the regulations or whatever. Over the last couple of seasons, we're going to shut it down once and for all. And not for all, because this is F1, there will always be ways that the engineers come up with, but still, the intention is to eliminate these type of issues. Now, the drama really arrives that many of the teams were utilizing the ability to do this as a way to gain performance, right? So let's say McLaren, for example, they've led the way on this and they had the best performing car this most recent season. Other teams were trying to catch up. Red Bull, we know, are apparently anyway furious with this change because they were putting a lot of their resources into developing for aero elasticity, which may only help them for the first few rounds of the season until Spain, and we can just actually check exactly when Spain is. So yeah, 1st of June is what we're looking at here. So we are talking 8 rounds and then Spain. So potentially a third of the season, Red Bull and others can use their flexible front wing, and after that it's going to be outlawed is the current discussion. Now, the teams have believed that, okay, if we can use this flexibility and therefore we can gain some performance advantages, but there's a feeling that the return of porpoising maybe could be on the cards here if they go back to these old flexibility gauges as they describe them, as of course we've seen over the last couple of days. So engineers apparently have revealed here to Auto Race. Now, of course, you also got to understand that it's the Italian press we're talking about here. They mainly have connections to Ferrari, although some to other teams, of course, as well. So there's some debate on which teams might be just talking to them, because McLaren, to be fair, in the first year, they were so slow that nobody even noticed if they were porpoising or not, because nobody really cared. In the first year, it was Mercedes, and it was Ferrari, who were quick, but Ferrari were, I mean, you guys probably remember the clips of them, Charles Leclerc and Sainz driving down the long back straight at Australia, bouncing up and down all over the shop. Like, that car was bad with the porpoising. I'm not going to go into all the technicalities and what causes it again today, but the reality is that you can't really see it in the tunnel, you can't really see it in your simulations. It's dependent on, because let's say the simulations, the track surface is perfectly neutral all of the time. It's a completely flat surface. In reality, it's not. So, and even though all those minor adjustments, they make differences to in terms of, what sort of, let's say, cyclical phenomenon is starting to be caused here with the advent of porpoising. And we know that Adrian Newey knew about this, and from day one he said, from an experienced engineer's perspective who's dealt with ground effects before, the key thing is the platform, the key thing is not maximizing downforce. But the engineers are discussing that in the final year of the regulations, if this is true that they're getting rid of the flexible front wings and stuff, that the engineers will have to push for more downforce, because that will be their way to balance the performance. So that apparently is worrying the teams, because they feel like that if they can't gain performance that way, then they have to gain it by increasing downforce, which again brings concerns about porpoising. Kind of what happened with Ferrari this year with their upgrades, Silverstone, Spain, Canada, like those type of races, that it was not ideal for them at all. that might be another thing that continues to happen. So, the greater overall stiffness on the front axle without having a coherent correlation available could lead to a step backwards in terms of performance. So, yeah, very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below, because it is true, I guess, that having these flexible wings reduces the risk of the bouncing in the high-speed corners. But, yeah, the reality is that there are some teams' concerns that actually these changes will push the teams further away from each other in terms of competitiveness, and potentially put some teams into a situation of serious risk where porpoising might return and could ruin a team's championship challenge. So definitely opens the door for some interesting developments, because let's say you're Red Bull and you've been putting a lot of your development resources into flexibility, and now that's going to be taken away from you. You might now need to adjust where you're putting that time into, more downforce. The problem then is that you arrive with more downforce from Spain onwards, and all of a sudden it's a bit of a different story. But then again, they're still running with that Adrian Newey suspension design from the first year of the regulations, pretty much. So maybe they'll get away with it. So yeah, intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Definitely interesting developments going on here. But yeah, plenty as always that we discussed today. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.